you wrote a fascinating piece in the Fin Review a couple of days ago, or I think it was in the Weekend Fin, when you have looked at the reasons behind the Liberal Party loss, and you've spoken to a lot of Liberals, that, you know, you canvass a range of factors from the women's issue to climate change to Scott Morrison's lack of personal popularity, and say that even though Australia did well during the pandemic, both in terms of the economy and death rate, you know, voters didn't like him. You know, from speaking to all the people that you spoke to for this in-depth piece, what do you think was one of, you know, the overarching reasons for their loss? Because as we've said, this wasn't so much a Labor win. The primary vote for Labor is low. It was a Liberal loss.
There's a great trauma going on in the party. And in a way, history is being written now. And so everyone is trying to get their version of what went wrong out there. And that's sort of just what I was tapping into, and other journalists are doing at the same time. What struck me is that even the Prime Minister's office is realistic that their Prime Minister, that his lack of popularity was a huge drag on the vote in places where it mattered. But there are other problems with the Liberal Party which also held it back. In part, the structural problems in the New South Wales Liberal Party, which led to those terrible pre-selection fights. Yeah. Okay. And also some problems with MPs who are in denial about whether they could lose their seats. Yeah. And I heard there's remarkable stories of some of these people who are now out of politics refusing to go door knocking.
I couldn't believe that when I read that in your piece. That was just extraordinary. Imagine an MP refusing to door knock. Nick Cater, you know, what's your sense for where the party needs to go now and where it went wrong?
Well, I think that there are some obvious explanations for it. You know, the it's time factor was a big one. Certainly, yeah. I think the Prime Minister's lack of popularity in some places, but because it's not an even picture. I mean, you look at Queensland and it's quite a different picture. Yes. Tasmania, remarkably. I mean, I think we're
compared to WA, couldn't get more different.
No. So around the country, you get a very different picture. But I think in the end, the really difficult question, which we're going to grapple with for a long while, is the rise of the third force in Australian politics.
Absolutely.
Which is this teal-green movement, and I do put them together. You know, Greens taking seats from Labor, Teals taking seats from the coalition, now to form a middle force, and they play on very different rules to mainstream political parties. You know, they run on feelings. They don't so much have policies as articles of faith, and it's very, very hard to find a way through to attack that. But the Liberals must, because they can't simply give up on those huge swathes of
and that's what's so extraordinary, that they were exposed for having no policies. Anyone who watched, you know, the debate that Monique Ryan had with Josh Frydenberg, you can see she had no policies other than that she was a woman and she supported climate change. And yet the voters in the most educated electorates in the country back then.
Yeah, and then, you know, I mean, to Erin's point, that the very mention of the name Barnaby Joyce seemed to push votes towards them. This is not normal, rational political decision-making, and it's something very different is happening, and Libs have got to get their heads around that, as have Labor for that matter, pretty quickly.